Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Sorry for that short delay. While we got the technology right, you'll probably have noticed a camera. We're streaming this event, as we do with all of these 8 events, live over the internet. So anybody who can't make it to the hall tonight can still watch in from the comfort of their own home. Welcome. It's great to see so many of you here. This is the second in a series of 8 Kingston Conversation events which we're holding across the borough through September and into October in different parts of the borough. My name, by the way, is Cormac Smith. I'm Head of Communications for the Council, and my job is to chair the session tonight. In a few moments, I'm going to hand you over to Councillor Kevin Davis, the leader of the Council. But before that, I would just like to say a few things about how we hope the event will go tonight. When I hand you over to Kevin, and then Terry is going to be speaking as well, what they say will be, I hope, fairly short, because the important thing tonight is to give as many or all of you the opportunity who want to ask questions and make a point as possible. So I think they'll keep between them to less than 15 minutes. My job tonight is to ensure that everybody who wants to have their say, ask a question or make a point gets an opportunity to do that. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people here, and I know there's a lot of big issues in the town centre, so I would ask you all, please, to work with me, and I will do my best to be as fair as possible. What I'd ask you to do in particular is to try and keep your questions fairly concise and brief, and please avoid making long speeches. And this is not for me or for us. This is to be considerate to other people, because we really do want to give everybody who wants an opportunity to speak the chance. After about an hour, I'm going to draw this section, i.e. the Q&A section, to a close, because the third section that we have planned tonight is an opportunity to talk to the panel members and a number of ward councillors who are going to introduce themselves in a moment, and it's important, I think, that you have that opportunity also. What I did last week, on the hour, I asked for a show of hands. I said it's democracy, and everybody was very, very keen to go on, so we went on for another 20 minutes or so. So I will do that again tonight, and it will be up to you whether we go on, but I will keep at least half an hour at the end to give you all the opportunity, because I'm aware some people like asking questions, but other people prefer to speak to people one-on-one. Now, just a few housekeeping rules that I have to make obligatory. The toilets are obviously at the door, and if you speak to any of my colleagues, they will show you exactly where they are. I've told you already we're streaming live over the internet. There's feedback forms left on all of your chairs. Now, we really want to improve these events as we go along, so we need to know exactly what you think. I would really, really appreciate it if you could all find a couple of minutes at the end of the night to fill in the feedback forms and leave them with us. That's hugely helpful, and it helps us to improve the events to suit you better. Finally, there's no scheduled fire alarms, so in the very, very unlikely event of anything untoward happening, please move in an orderly fashion towards the exits, and myself and my colleagues will look after you and do our best to guide you out and so forth. But please God, nothing is going to happen there. What I would now like to do, we have some ward members at the front and also some council officers. I would just like to take a couple of minutes to, if you could wait for the microphone as well, to let each ward member just say who they are, so you can speak, you know who they are, and speak to them afterwards.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Phil Doyle. I'm the Conservative Ward Councillor for Grove Ward, and I've lived in Kingston for about 9 years. I live right opposite Ravensay Island. I'm also the Chairman of the Licensing Committee in the Council.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Hugh Scantlebury. I'm a Tudor Ward Councillor in North Kingston and also the Chair of Kingston Town Neighbourhood.
Thanks, Hugh.
Good evening. My name's Bill Brisbane. I'm the Lib Dem ward member for Norbiton. I've lived in Norbiton since 1990, and I'm the opposition lead spokesman on planning and growth.
Hi, I'm John Solly. I'm the newly elected Liberal Democrat councillor for Grove Ward. I live and work right in the heart of Kingston, right here. I will be on growth and licensing going forward.
And I believe we have one more councillor in the audience.
Thank you. I'm David Cunningham. I'm Conservative councillor in Tudor Ward. I'm the lead member for regeneration, assets and planning policy. And it's not significant. I'm away out on the left, away from everybody else.
And if we could just have my two colleagues here as well.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Gary Walsh and I'm the lead officer for communities at Kingston.
Thank you, Gary. And Neville Rainfield, ladies and gentlemen, Neighbourhood Manager for Kingston Town with the Council.
Councillors, colleagues, thank you very much. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to the Leader of the Council, Kevin Davis.
Thank you very much, Cormac, and a very big thank you to all of you for coming along this evening. The first time we held one of these last week, actually about an hour before the meeting, it absolutely poured down with rain. I didn't expect anybody to turn up, but still actually over in Tolworth we had a number of people that did turn up. This evening it's even more surprising because it's actually a lovely day it's been, and I'm surprised that so many people have wanted to come here rather than sit in their gardens or look at the go into part of the town. But thank you very much for turning up anyway. It's really important to us. There are three big issues which this council faces, like many other councils. We're not alone. Sometimes I think we feel that everything here is a sort of echo chamber of ourselves. It's our own microcosm here in Kingston, and the things that we have happen to us and the things that we have to deal with don't happen elsewhere. But the reality is there's some big changes going on in councils and in local government right across the UK, but especially here in London. So there are three things, as I say, which I think are really, really important that we have a discussion about. The first one is actually what we're doing this evening, which is about the discussion. It's about the engagement we as a council have with the people that live here. Because there's a sense that the way councils communicate are probably best summed up by a sort of 20th century look at communications. So when a planning application comes out, you get a letter through the post. And that really has got to change. And we need to find new ways of working together, us as a council, as councillors, as council officers, with the people that actually live here. So we can understand a bit more about what people in Kingston want and about how they would prefer things to be done. We're not always going to agree. We are going to disagree from time to time. But I'm hopeful with these types of conversations, with things like the all-in-one survey that was done back last year, where others are given an opportunity as well to contribute to it. And as we do more and more of these types of events, we'll have a much, much better understanding between us about what our views are. The second big issue which we face is one around growth. It is a problem for us. I'm not going to talk necessarily just about one aspect, which sometimes growth gets pushed into, which is, of course, the essential issue about housing, because wherever you are in London, there is a crying need for more homes. So that's not so much the issue that I want to try and talk you through today. Actually, more fundamental to that is something which I know many of you worry about, which is where does the infrastructure come from that makes all those houses possible, if at all, if we want them. So there's a huge problem we have here with growth in London, that we need to make sure that we get the GP surgeries, the schools, the better transport that we all want. But in that debate, and I'm being honest with you about this, sometimes just appealing to government to fund some of those infrastructure projects is not easy, because government's response will often be, well, what do we get in return for allowing you to do those things? So increasing the train, increasing the road network is often something we're asked, what's the payback for us as government if we do invest in those types of infrastructure? So there is the growth agenda. It's a mixture of more people wanting to live here, London growing and Kingston growing. And it is growing. London has literally in the last year only just got back to the last peak population, which was in the 1930s, around 8.6 million people in London. It's taken a long time to get back to that. There was quite a big decline, understandably, after the war, and it's slowly crept back. The growth predictions are that by 2050, that 8.6 will go to 11 million. And that's an awful lot of people. Even if only half that number was accurate, that would still be close on to 20% growth in population in a place like Kingston. So we do have to talk about it, we do have to discuss it, we do have to come to an understanding about where we fit with it, what our role is in it, and how we can manage that as best we can for everybody that lives here. I've lived here pretty much my entire life. I was born in New Malden, brought up in Old Malden. I've known this place extremely well, the town centre, been very, very actively involved in also its church and its redevelopment for probably a best part of 35 years. So I know this town very well. I've been brought up in it. So I understand some of what's going on. But even somebody who knows it incredibly well has to rethink sometimes what that town is about if we're faced with the type of growth we're talking about. The final one which I want you to think about, and when we come to the questions, the final issue is our budget. Now, we hear lots about austerity. For many people, they feel that austerity is finished with, that we're now growing as a country, our budget, our economy is heading in the right direction. But actually, for us, those that run public services, we are still faced with a very steep problem. By 2018, the council will be spending pretty much 45% less than it would have been in 2010. So 8 years, our budget will shrink by nearly a half. Now that cannot be absorbed without a change in the way a council operates, a change in the way you think a council is and what it's there to do, and a better understanding about some of the issues that we're going to have to face. So we've got a lot to do. This is a borough that already charges the highest council tax in London, so it's not open to us to just say we can absorb that through higher council tax. So we do have to think about the council of the future. What are those things that we're going to stop doing? Because for as long as we just salami slice, we just make every service in the borough poor. So our objective is to try and identify those things that you value most, so that when we come to take those decisions, we know that the things that we're stopping doing are things that you may still would wish were there, but actually in the end are as low a priority for you than many other things the council can and will be doing. So it's a big agenda. How we engage better with you, how we manage the issue of growth, which has many negatives as well as a few positives, and also how we then deal with the role of the future council on a massively reduced budget, which is the reality of where we face. Now, I'm going to hand you over to Councillor Terry Payton, who's going to take you through a couple of issues he wants to raise, which are somewhat more detailed than this, and also talk to you about something we are currently launching, which is the Cleaner Kingston campaign. And then we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm not that familiar with public speaking events like this, so if you please pardon me for using my notes because I've got a lot of important things to say and I don't want to forget anything. There's probably only about 4 of you in here who actually know who I am, so I'd like to introduce myself firstly and why I've got involved with the council, and then why Kevin has perhaps brought me on to become chair of the residents committee. I'd like to start with this brief background. I was born in Fulham and I've lived in London for all of my life. I moved to New Malden 22 years ago, where I still live with my family. Since retiring from the police force following a serious ankle injury, I've been conducting my own business within the borough. I became involved in local politics just over 3 years ago now. I was fed up of how New Malden residents were being ignored by the then administration. In passing, I spoke to my neighbour, the late Howard Jones. I complained that local residents' views were being disregarded. Howard and I discussed many local issues and the things we had in common as ex-police officers, and ways in fact we could pretty much change the world. He is sadly missed. I clearly felt strongly about local issues. Howard suggested I should get involved with local politics. He was the leader of the then opposition Conservative group. Some weeks later, we discussed the possibility of me running for council in 2014. I was elected following a by-election on the 25th of July 2013, just over 2 years ago. I certainly could not be described as a career politician. The whole reason I'm involved is to do my best for the people I represent So just to make it clear, I'm not interested for challenging for David Cameron's job. Thankfully, we won the council election in May last year. I was privileged to become co-chair of Mordens and Combe neighbourhood. The very project that brought me into local politics was first on my agenda, the development of Cox Crescent in New Morden. We reported the development brief as not fit for purpose, which was then thrown out of development control for the exact same reason. I had ideas and the opportunity to really get the community involved in the project. I received the full backing and support from Kevin to work with the community on a plan for local residents to decide what is best for the Cox Crescent site. We formed the New Morden Futures Group, which was formed from the local community. Residents, councillors and the council working together to bring forward a resident-led planning brief, and the workshops are planned next before we bring out the planning brief early next year. In July this year, I became chair of the Residents Committee. It's clear there are many challenges ahead for us all. We simply cannot bury our heads in the sand and hope it all goes away, because it won't. We have to face things. I hope you've now still all seen the Cleaner Kingston campaign. There have been deliberately provocative attempts to grab your attention, but it does make a serious point. The campaign focuses on 5 behaviours that are an issue in either parts or all of our borough. Littering, including spitting, cigarette butts, chewing gum, dog fouling, street urination. We have a clean borough, but we want a pristine borough. We obviously cannot achieve this alone, and throwing more money at street cleansing is no longer an option, as Kevin has made very clear. We know from the all-in-one survey, while clean streets are top priority for 9 out of 10 of you, just 6 out of 10 of you are actually satisfied with how clean the streets are. If we all work together, we can achieve a lot. We can also save a lot of money, and that money could be better spent on essential services elsewhere. Other services which matter to a vast majority of you is waste and recycling. At the beginning of next year, we'll be making some changes of how to deliver this service. These changes will save money and help us to recycle more, but they will not put huge demands on households. Most of us will need to make some changes to the way we organise our recycling. We will be asking everyone to play their part to help the council to do things differently and more efficiently. We're still working on the figures, but these changes are likely to save around £4 million. Information about the changes to the services will be available later this year, and new service is due to start early next year. So while we can't give exact details tonight, it's important to say that that is one of a number of important changes that we simply have to make. In the coming years, if we're going to face these massive financial challenges. Once again, the key issue to success would be the council and local people working together. As Kevin has always said, the world for local government really has changed forever. Securing our futures and the futures for our borough is going to require all of us to work together in a way that we probably haven't done before. So while we will answer as many questions as we can tonight, we hope this can be a start to a better relationship where we can tackle the future together. Thank you.
Kevin, Terry, thank you very much. I now want to move in on my colleague Dean. If you could wait for the microphone, please. One, as I say, we're streaming this, so I want people at home to be able to hear the questions, but also so everybody else in the audience can hear. So if you can wait until my colleague Dean gets to you. So have we got somebody who would like to ask the first question? Gentleman in the blue down the back, followed by this lady here.
Good evening. My name is Brian Godding. I'm from the Kingston Society. We had a presentation the other day by the developers of the Eden Quarter. I asked them how many of the flats would be allocated for affordable housing. To my astonishment, he said none. We will not do that. We will make a financial contribution based on the profitability of the scheme, which the council will then spend on affordable housing. Can this possibly be true? And if it is, how on earth will the council spend this money as councils do not build housing anymore?
Thanks, sir. Mrs. Wood. Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Let me deal with a couple of issues. I mean, let me deal with the last one first about councils not building houses anymore. Well, that is possibly what used to be the case, but it isn't going to be the case in the future. As has been identified many times, there is a housing crisis across London, and there is a massive housing issue within Kingston. The traditional way of building houses was through the council estates and council-owned stock that we have. We're a quite unique borough because we actually still own our stock. Quite a lot of boroughs transfer their stock out to registered social landlords, to housing associations, when it was very popular to do so, when they thought there were lots of efficiencies back in the 80s and 90s. We didn't do that. We still own our stock. The decision has been taken that we're going to explore, and we have started the process of exploring, estates renewal and regeneration. Now that will mean looking at places like the Cambridge estate and others and saying, is there a better way of providing homes for council tenants on these estates? Now this is partly driven by a desire for more homes generally and growth. It's also driven by the fact that the council does only own 5,500 homes, and yet there are over 8,000 people on our waiting list at the moment. So there are generally, it's fair to say, people on that waiting list that will never get a council home unless we take some action around that. So yes, it is the case that in the past councils haven't built homes. The future is different. We are going to have to, because I don't see we can get ourselves out of this housing crisis unless we balance the development of private residential with actually council-owned stock that will be done at a much reduced rate. The issue of affordable is a pan-London issue, which is different in London from every other part of the country. The reality is that we set targets, as probably many of you in this room know, of 50%. That target has never been met in the past few years in Kingston. In fact, it's never been met anywhere in London. The target originates from what is known as the London Plan. It wasn't actually Kingston's target to start with. It came from the London Plan. The cost of land and all those sorts of issues has apparently put all this to bed. There is a complicated network of calculations that go on every time we look at new developments to try and work out what is affordable housing and what rate you can possibly achieve. The issue is, and I'm going to be completely frank with you here, because I think actually, there's no point in me hiding this. I would agree with you, and I think is what you're trying to say, is what is an affordable house in Kingston? Because if we are really saying that a one-bed flat in the town centre is currently going for 320,000, 330,000, even if you were to discount that house by half, which nurse and which newly qualified teacher could afford to buy that? The reality is none, because they wouldn't get a mortgage on a property even at £175,000. So we must be very careful here, getting too caught up in what is affordable and what is not. That doesn't mean we must strive always to get more. We have achieved, on average, about 19% in Kingston over the past few years of affordable housing, but that's about the maximum we ever get to. There's some sites we can get a bit more, but not much more. But it is a massive issue. It's an issue across London, and it's one which I have raised with the Mayor Boris Johnson and said we need to do a pan-London approach to trying to sort it out. That was a long answer, and I do apologise.
There's a gentleman down the back to my left-hand side, and then this lady here in the fantastic.
Thank you. And thank you for laying on tonight. I welcome the fact that residents can actually give some feedback to the councillors. My name's Jonathan Rollison. I've lived in the borough for some 35 years. I've seen it change, and I'm seeing it changing still. It's going up and becoming a skyscraper type development rather than the medieval town that I moved into that time. And it does seem from a planning perspective that the council hasn't listened to residents. Of course we want more houses, but that doesn't mean building iconic towers and modelling ourselves on Croydon. And that does seem to have happened. Why is it that the council simply in the past haven't listened and got us into the mess we are in currently?
Well, I'll deal with that. I mean, we are listening. I mean, we are listening to what's being said. I too am not completely sold on the idea of tall towers. I've said very many times in the past that I appreciate good design of buildings, and if sometimes that means a taller building than would be the norm, then we must consider it. The reality is, though, in Kingston, is that you're absolutely right. The generality of levels is quite low. It's not very high anyway in the medieval centre, which is probably best based around the marketplace. But certainly as you move to the periphery of Wheatfield Way, there are obviously taller buildings. The great sadness for me, and I don't think this isn't a political issue, is I don't think we've ever been very good at building buildings in Kingston. If you look at what I would consider two of the most ugliest buildings in Kingston, they are tall, and that's Kingston College and what I used to remember being called the Combined Insurance Building, which is the one opposite the cattle market. They are two very ugly buildings, and it just happens that they are the tallest buildings that we seem to have at the moment. I would say this too, because this is always a very difficult issue for planning and for councillors, is that we would love to be able to sit here and say we are all powerful. We'd love to be able to sit here and say we can just say no. But the reality is that's not available to us because we don't own the land. It's up to developers to put in their applications and for us to judge whether we find it acceptable or not. But even if we find it acceptable, as we've learnt to our cost in Kingston, we can very easily get those buildings ending up being built because some inspector in Bristol decides to grant permission against it. So I'm not saying absolutely no to buildings of any type. I think we have to judge them on their merits when they do arrive and look at them very carefully and then make a judgment. But I agree with you that we mustn't, for whatever reason, impinge upon the medieval centre of the town because that would be an absolute horrific crime.
Lady with the green hair to my right.
I'm going to come and stand on the platform because I think that people...
Sorry, excuse me. Please stay.
Now, that gentleman has just made my point that residents don't have the same clout as the Blackburn Party. Chessington born, proud of it, lived there until I was about 7, moved with my parents to Surbiton, came back in 1979 to Chessington, so I've seen a lot of changes. Now, what I want to talk about is communication, people listening to us, these people and you. When you phone the contact centre, what happens? Who do you get? You get somebody on the telephone who may or may not be able to put you through to the person to whom you want to speak. You may be offered the survey thing. Now, if you're put through to another department, you can't do the survey, you get cut off, so that's one thing. This is why you find that your survey doesn't work, because we can't do the survey. That's been addressed in the past, I don't know what's happening with it. So who do you go to if you've got a problem? Somebody will come to me, because I used to be a residents' association person. Excuse me, I'm going to sit on here before I fall over. So people will come to me and say, I've got a problem with my drains, Chris, I've got a problem with this, I've got a problem with that. I'm the face, I'm the hair, where do we go to? So the next thing to do is to go to the estate manager.
Excuse me, madam, this is really very unfair to an awful lot of people who are not going to have the opportunity to ask questions tonight. I asked you all very, very humbly to please work with me. There's a lot of people have come out here tonight, and we have set out a format to try and be fair to everybody. So could I please ask you to ask a question, but please refrain from giving a speech. It's not fair on everybody else.
Right, so let's take a show of hands. Do you want to hear me? Do you want to hear him? Who wants to hear me? Come on. Anybody else? Or do you want to hear him?
Right, well, thank you very much, folks.
This is your problem.
Lady in the pink blouse, please.
When you listen to residents,
Oh dear. Good evening. My name's Andrea Walker and I live in Grove Ward. My family moved here at the end of the war. And I'm very fond of Kingston. Just one thing I would add to what the lady says is that the actual Kingston website is appalling. Unless you're a really good computer buff, finding your way around it is a nightmare. But that wasn't what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to say something about was, if you walk around Kingston at the moment, There are houses and flats being built everywhere, and when you ask people about them, they are for students. From June until September, invariably they're empty. Now I realise that these aren't developed by Kingston, but they are given planning permission, and it would be nice, and they can't be that expensive to live in because students aren't rolling in money. So if there's all this cheaper property for students, and I would beg you, please don't let us have any more than we've already got in the way of students in Kingston. Enough is enough. But I don't understand. Can you talk to me about student housing, please?
Andrew, last question a minute about the website. I'm sure she'd like to agree. Let me deal with the student accommodation issue, because it is, again, it's another issue which seems to crop up quite a lot, and I agree completely that we've seemed to have developed a rash of student accommodation over the last probably 2 to 3 years, actually. I don't think it's just recently, it's been going on for some time. Let me explain why that happened, and I'm being open again and honest with you. When the last development framework for this council was written, which was some years ago now, there was a negotiation with the university. The university said to us, look, if you include a figure for student accommodation, i.e. the amount we would like to see built, then we would have a much better scenario where students who are currently living in family residences that are homes of multiple occupation that are divided up, they would no longer be required, and students would be able to move into this new student accommodation. Now, on paper, that's plausible, because obviously there's a maximum of students. In fact, the number of students at the university is declining at the moment. But planned, it's not people not wanting to go, they are planning to decline the number of students. And so on paper, it seemed reasonable. What, of course, actually happened was that when the developers then all turned up saying, well, actually, we can build this housing for students, the university then shut its doors and said, actually, we can't deal with you because, unfortunately, there's a European procurement law that prevents us having a relationship with you as a developer of student housing. Now, the consequence of that is that this housing's got built, and the university has no policy of allocating students to it. So I know you're going to be shocked, but we discovered last summer that actually about half of the student population that's using this new housing is coming out of the LSE and Imperial and King's and using this as a commuter dormitory town. Now, you know, in one sense, we can have a debate about that, but that wasn't the objective of this. The second issue that's now happened is that because the university wouldn't contract with these developers, the developers have built the wrong type of student housing for the university. Because the university wants clusters of 5 or 6 bedrooms around a kitchenette, whereas actually those types of students that aren't from the university want single rooms of accommodation. Now, we can't go back. We've got what we've got. There are still applications that are being built out. But actually what we have done is there's a new thing called a community infrastructure levy that is about to be introduced in Kingston, which is basically a property tax on new building, which the government has introduced. What we've done is said that that property tax has to be as high as it possibly can on student accommodation, has to be higher than it is for even normal residential accommodation, to stop developers coming here and actually building. And when the university then sorts out all its EU procurement issues, we might have a discussion with them about what we do about that level. But until then, we want to stop as much as we possibly can. I know, Andrew, I want to pick up about the website.
I actually want to pick up about the student accommodation first. So I'm Andrea Craig. I'm a Canberra ward councillor, and obviously our ward borders Grove, and we have a lot of student accommodation, not as much as Grove. I've been a councillor since 2010, and actually in Kingston Town neighbourhood, there are individuals in this room who know that we had, as Kevin said, actually it's longer than 3 years, it's 5, 6, 7 years, application after application after application for student accommodation. When I first became a councillor, we were under huge pressure always to accept on the basis that the university needed the places, and it got ridiculous. We were in opposition. We in opposition actually challenged why the administration was allowing the student accommodation to happen, and when the last actual analysis had been done about the need versus the amount that was being built, And unsurprisingly, it hadn't been done for years. So that was one of the first commitments we said when we took over, if we became the party in administration, was that we would look at that. For anyone who's worked with me in Canberra, we actually fought very, very hard against a development that included a student accommodation brief, which is in the gasworks side by Sainsbury's in Surrey Basin. And unfortunately, again, the brief that had been put in place under the previous administration included yet again more student accommodation. We fought it all the way up to basically the inspectorate, and we lost, unfortunately. But your point is well made, and it is well known, and we are doing everything we can to make sure that if there is more student accommodation, one, why should it be in the town centre? That was my other point. Why should everything be in the town centre? We actually do need more housing in the town centre, but we need more housing for, as you said earlier, for nurses, for teachers, for the police. And we love students and we welcome students. They're a very big part of our life. No one has a problem with them. Maybe you don't. But we don't mind them in Kingston as a borough. But we do need to make sure we're clever about where we accommodate. To get back to your point about communication, and I know this, I actually did want to hear what her question was, but unfortunately we didn't hear the question. But I know there is a lot of frustration around communications, and one of the things I wanted to say was two things. The website is not perfect yet. Hopefully you have seen actually that it has improved drastically. There was enormous amounts of money put into it before we came in. I think it was about £250,000, and it really still looked terrible in my view. And my job is in technology, so it's awful when you can't navigate quickly and you can't sit and say it's because the browser's wrong or whatever. It's still a work in progress. Bear with us. We've had vast improvements, but there's more to come. And lastly, I was going to say that under Cormac's leadership, actually, I hope you have seen a better style of communication coming out. But what we do say is that if you're having a problem with the website and you can't get hold of anyone, get in touch with your local councillors and we will help, because the more information we find out about it, the more we can fix glitches. Thank you.
Lady with her hand up here.
Hi. I was wondering, so I live in Canberra, I think. I was wondering why I don't know if you're going to be spending a lot of money on building a new library, but in terms of thinking what the future is going to be like, everything seems to be pretty much online, and I'm wondering whether it's a good use of money given the kind of costs of everything coming down, where pretty much everything is on the internet, and maybe looking at maybe using the money for something else if budget's troubling. It's a bit like being devil's advocate, but sorry.
The library. Well, my understanding, it's very different because Kingston's never actually had a central library. Most other boroughs in London do have a central library. We've not really ever got to that situation. When you look at the usage of Kingston Library, actually there's a phenomenal number of children that use it. It is actually, that's the area of biggest growth is in children's usage of the libraries. In fact, I was recently shared, and we are looking at a scheme which has been done in another London borough, where every child in the borough is issued a library ticket. No turning up with forms, we just issue them one and just see whether we can get the usage to grow even further. So that's something we're thinking about at the moment and whether we consider it. The next biggest user actually of libraries in Kingston, it's not true everywhere else obviously in the borough, is actually the university students. And the university, within its new building, which is planned on Penryn Road, is now putting in a proper university library. So we are going to have to think about what the usage in the future of the library in Kingston is. I think what's interesting, though, is it's fundamentally not a central library. It is a community library. It serves the people of Grove specifically. I mean, the kids that come particularly from the Groves area, the Portland Road and those sorts of areas, St John's area, and use that library are very, very significant. And I think we must always think of it that way rather than as a central library.
I think it would be good to hear a word from Andrea Craig, as it's her portfolio area.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think what I would just add to what Kevin said is that actually libraries in the traditional sense, just as a library, probably won't remain as they are. They are community hubs, and actually what we want is we want greater facilities and services through there. I'm originally from New Zealand, and in New Zealand you don't just have a library, you have a library that might have a sports hall or a gym associated with it. There's lots of facilities for toy swapping. There's all sorts of different things that gets the young, the old, everyone intermingles. It's really, really beautifully done, and we need to get back to those sorts of models where we're actually thinking far more as a community about the needs of the community, and the library should be a community hub. But I'm happy to talk to you later if you've got specific ideas. Okay?
I'm John DeQuitt. I'm a Norbiton resident for almost 40 years. I don't think any of us would take issue with the provision of additional accommodation and additional infrastructure, schools and so on. Up in Norbiton, however, we have a problem in that a number of schemes are being put forward with no parking provision on a site where there really isn't room. And when I talked to the developers, they said, they can park in local streets. As you, I'm sure, know, local streets are already pretty full. And my question, therefore, is does the council have a policy that new blocks of flats, new schools, new facilities like this actually have sufficient parking places?
Yeah, let me explain a bit about planning and how it works. I said earlier that we're not all powerful in planning, and much that we'd sometimes like to be and just be able to say no. The method by which planning works is it's a sort of tiered system of planning policy. So the government has a national planning policy framework, which was in 2010 reduced from 1,500 pages to about 50. So it was very, very significantly reduced in terms of planning policy and what was available to us to defend what we're trying to do. Sitting underneath that is something called the London Plan, which is the London-wide Greater London Authority plan for planning in that context. And then further under that is also our own local plans. The difficulties we always have is that every tier down must not be in conflict with the tier above it. So we can only do what actually, in a sense, the London Plan has got, and it's very difficult to restrict ourselves in that. I think I'm right in saying that the London Plan has a policy, I think it's 0.75, I'm looking at planning people who know better than I, parking spaces per unit of accommodation. I think that's right. And that tends to be what we tend to use as a guide. But as I said at the beginning, with planning, things aren't black and white. We can't just say it's exceeded that policy or it's not met our expectations to turn it down, because it has to be done on a balance of policy and arguments. And so sometimes a developer will come along and make a case that, yes, okay, it doesn't meet that planning policy for parking, but it does this. And that's always the problem that we have. I mean, I wish it were better that we could just say no and there wasn't a right of appeal. I actually would prefer that local determination was what trumped everything else. But at the moment, that isn't the system.
Ward councillor who I think would like to make a further point on that particular issue.
Hello, John. Good evening. I know the sites you're referring to, and turning from the general to the more specific. The problem with these developments is they're near Norbiton Station, and they have a high public accessibility quotient. For that reason, under planning law, they can get away with less car parking than if they were out in Chessington. Now, this is becoming a real problem in Norbiton, as you're well aware. We have real parking issues, and I've been taking it up with the Council's Highways Department to try and use the money from Section 106 to undertake a comprehensive parking survey of the Norbiton area, with the potential of introducing an extension to the existing CPZs, because the planning permissions are granted on the condition that parking will be capped, and residents, or for the student scheme and for the short stay hotel scheme that's coming forward, will not be able to apply for parking permits. But that only works if parking in the controlled parking zones continues late in the evening. So that's a difficult and an important issue that we're exploring with the Highways Department.
First this gentleman here, and then the lady behind him, or the gentleman behind him.
Just hold the microphone quite close. Hi, I'm Kevin Murphy. I've lived in Kingston Grove for about 30 years or so, and I actually think there's some really positive things about living in Kingston, and I think there are aspects of quality of life here which we should really acknowledge and endorse. That said, I'm aware that this evening is about trying to discuss what are the pressures on the council and how do you prioritise. And I was thinking about expenditure because we've talked a lot about the visible, the public, the streets, the parking, the houses, the buildings, the students. But looking at council expenditure, and I'm just looking at the information that came out with the council tax, which you've already noted is the highest in London. And part of that's because, in part, we're a relatively small borough as well in population size. So the largest expenditure is 41% on adult social care. That's £54 million. This year. I'm just interested in how you see that in terms of increasing pressures, what thinking has been done, what plans you've got about trying to manage some of that. I'm not suggesting cutting it, but I'm just trying to think about that. They strike me as being quite important challenges that the council face. And I'd be interested to know what thought you've given to that, alongside learning and children's services, which is 26% of expenditure.
Yeah, you raise a very, very interesting point there about adult social care. I mean, one of the biggest problems that we face, which I probably should have put into context at the beginning, is not only do we have a 45% reduction in spend, but we also have a growing population and a growing older population. In fact, our population has grown 11% in the last 10 years, and we've managed to accommodate that by almost everybody, I don't know who hasn't, but almost everybody building an extension or going into the roof. And significant amongst that is that children are staying at home longer, much, much longer, and that's causing some of these pressures which we're seeing. The difficulty for many residents is that they often don't draw on many services. So if you've got older children who aren't living at home, or are not going to school rather, or you don't actually have any contact with adult social care, the things that most impact you and what you pay for, what you perceive you're paying for, are visible to you. They are the grass cutting, the roads, the parks, the things that actually we will take as value for life issues. But those are quite a small part of the overall budget. In fact, they're very small in comparison to the huge things that you're talking about. But if you deal with adult social care, that is a massive, massive problem for us, because we all know that the population is ageing. That's all partly driven by us all living longer. So the consequences of that, we want to wrap care around us in a way which, to support us as we get older. There's also been quite a massive democratic shift in London, demographic shift in London, which you actually, in a sense, I'm not trying to be rude, I really promise you I'm not, you actually represent. Because I'm sure there's a few here, but there's certainly many, many more people who are retiring and no longer moving down to Dorset. They're not putting themselves in the middle of a field in a lovely thatched chocolate box and living out their life there. And the reason for that is that we're all quite bright people, and we recognise that was fine when our life expectancy was late 60s, early 70s. If we're going to live to 90 whatever or 100 whatever it is, then actually we need to be much closer to hospital and care and all those sorts of things to support us as we get older. And so what's happening is, and we are seeing it, is that more and more people are moving into town centres, particularly older generations. We're getting people who are retiring out of New Malden, selling up there very expensive homes and buying quite expensive flats in the town centre. So those are the types of pressures we're going to have to adjust to as well. And we are looking at how we can better do that. Now, one way we can do that, and I'm being open with you about this, is actually join up more of our services between us, the health service, police, whoever it is, because we need to find a much more coordinated way of dealing with all of these big issues that we've never really tackled before. I mean, would you be surprised if I told you that 60% of all blue light call-outs that the police attend are actually health related? They're not actually to do with crime. They're there about people who've fallen over or a domestic problem needs to be sorted out, usually around health. And so we've got a lot to do still, and to be honest with you, councils, all other public services have been very lazy about this in the past and not really worked hard enough on it. And we've got to do a lot more work to try and make those sorts of things happen.
Before I go to the next question from the gentleman in the check shirt, could I just ask you a couple of things? It's up to you. It would be really helpful if you could stand up and introduce yourself. But also, these microphones are a bit tricky. You see, I'm holding it very close to my mouth. So could you hold the microphones close to your mouth, please? Thank you very much. The gentleman in the check shirt.
My name is Graham Harris. I live in Grove Ward, facing the Thames Path. My issue is with antisocial behaviour. I've had occasion to call the police twice in the last month. I hear there are more police officers available, but when I see them, it's lunchtime or 3 o'clock in the afternoon when nothing's happening. When you need to see things happening in Thames Path, it's midnight to 3 o'clock in the morning. What is really being done by the council against antisocial behaviour?
I'll ask Councillor.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we are working much more closely with the police. We're trying to do as much as we possibly can with the police on this. There have been, I think you're alluding to, 12 more police put into the street, which actually we paid for. We didn't pay for all 12. We got a bog off, a buy one get one free out of Boris, which meant that we could double the money that was put into it if we actually arranged it. Now, they are there specifically for the town centre. There's a double benefit. It benefits the town centre, clearly, to have more police available. It also means that actually those areas around the town centre, so Surbiton and others, don't lose their police when there's a problem inside the town centre. Because there are some serious issues around that, and we do have problems in town centre, particularly economic crime around the shops. And I only wish we could get the retailers to be a bit more responsible about that as well, because sometimes they don't seem to spend quite as much money in their own security and rely too much on the police to deal with that. So there is that issue. The second issue is that. Having said all that, we have already, as I said, tried to introduce a new Cleaner Kingston campaign, which has come up, which is really aimed at trying to work around antisocial behaviour around litter, because I don't know what anybody else's view is, but my view is that low-level antisocial behaviour leads to more problematic antisocial behaviour later down the line. It's the usual story. If you don't get that piece of graffiti off a wall almost as soon as it's put up, then the chances are you'll get more and more graffiti added to it, and you really need to sort of tackle it early on. So we're trying to work on all those things. We're working very collaboratively with the police. And also, I'm aware that Kingston First, who you may not be aware of, is something called a business improvement district, operates within the town centre, which is paid for out of an additional rate top-up by the businesses. They too are involved in looking at what more we can do around crime. It is an issue. It is a town centre. And I'm saying that because it is the case that we do have a mix of restaurants and nightlife in Kingston that's always going to be there, and is part of the appeal why so many of us want to come into Kingston and stay here in the evening. So there is always the risk that there's going to be some form of antisocial behaviour. It's about controlling it, I think, as much as anything else.
Councillor Patton, you're an ex-policeman and you're also responsible for the Cleaner Kingston campaign. So I think we must hear. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, thank you very much, Cormac. Like I said, I'm a former policeman. It's a few years ago now. Obviously, I've been building up a relationship with the local police and trying to find out the pressures that they have. And part of the reasons why we have funded a 50-50 campaign for the officers in the town centre. So we pay for 6 new police officers, and the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime has funded the other 6. Also, the local borough commander has then put 2 sergeants in with that they've paid for. So that increases the actual officers within the town centre. That has an effect across the whole borough, because there were officers being taken out of the outer lying areas to support the centre of Kingston, and also officers from Kingston leaving the area to do other duties. Well, we have control over these officers now because we are paying for them. These are town centre officers. They stay in the town centre. There has been drastic reductions in various different types of crime within the town centre, shoplifting crimes, various antisocial behaviour crimes, because these officers are actually there, and that is their job. They will stay there. So we're trying our best to work with the police to protect the centre of the town, as well as protecting the outlying areas, which is stopping officers being drawn away from areas such as New Malden to be brought into Kingston, and we're doing our best to help with that. So I hope that's of some help.
Gentleman in the black t-shirt at the back of the hall.
Hello, my name's Adrian Wheeler. I live in Grosvenor Ward. I've lived there for 25 years. I just wanted to voice an opinion about the developments that are due to happen in Kingston. They're obviously under planning constraints at the moment. They're being discussed. But what I would like to say is that obviously Kingston's not perfect because there are the ugly buildings that we all know about. And what I would like to say is, my question is Kingston safe in this administration's hands? Because my worry is that we're going to be turning Kingston into New Croydon with these massive tower blocks that have been proposed. There is the opportunity area where a dotted line has been drawn around a corner of the Fairfield, and there may be a possibility of selling the bus station, council-owned property to allow development there and move the Monday market to a corner of the Fairfield, which is a lovely open space. And part of what I'm saying is, we don't want to throw away what we still have in Kingston, the lovely spaces that we have, the Victorian villas surrounding the Fairfield, the All Saints Church. When you come over the bridge from the Richmond side, you see All Saints Church, and you might possibly see an enormous tower looming over that side of Kingston. So that's my question. Is the borough safe in this administration hands?
Yes, it is. We do. I mean, you expect me to say that, wouldn't you? We do need to build homes. I mean, I don't think anybody in this room can doubt that there is a requirement for that. As I said earlier, I mean, our record in building in Kingston is not good, full stop. I think some of the things we've built are very ugly. I've mentioned two of them. And I don't mean just older buildings. I think in more recent times we've not had much success. I'm not a particular fan of the Canberra Riverside development. I think that's unfortunate that was put through again by an inspector. It wasn't something that the council decided on. So, as I said, we are not all powerful. We are in the hands of judging whatever it is a developer brings forward for a planning application. If they came forward with a scheme that was for 150 stories, not as if they would, but if they did, then we'd still have to judge it. And that's the case of any local authority in any place. Now, we have said that there are possibly places, but they are very, very limited, where you could have taller buildings. But it really does need those applying for those applications to judge what that is required and what that means. And I certainly don't believe that anything that's bigger than the existing landscape is worthwhile looking at. I know, I'm going to address this because it's very important you understand this. Some people have said to me in the past, why have we not got a tall buildings policy? Well, there was an attempt to look at a tall buildings policy about a year ago. No, more than that, sorry, about 18 months ago. And in fact, nowadays in London, they're not really called tall buildings policies. They tend to be called view policies across London. So there was an attempt at a view policy. Most of what we saw from that, it's not been adopted because it did look at areas in a sort of donut shape that you could potentially put taller buildings into. They weren't massively different from where they are now, where the sites potentially for them are now, but there could have been a lot more of them. And unfortunately, part of the reason why that view policy never went anywhere was because actually it started over on Canberra Riverside and took that as a reference point for what you could potentially do around a donut of the town. And frankly, I don't think that's acceptable. So I hear what you're saying. We can't be all seeing or knowing. We don't own very much land in the centre of the borough. We own some, but not very much. And we have to see what comes forward and judge that. And then we can all sit and have a debate about whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing.
Hi, my name's Phil Boyle, and as much as I'd like to say I've lived here for 40 years, I think it's pretty obvious I haven't. I moved here a year ago. But I've got a very brief observation and a very brief comment, both of which are positive. The first is Kingston's a fantastic place, and knowing lots of other bits of London, I'm really so happy with my choice of moving here. And I think there's an awful lot of very positive things in this borough, and I think sometimes we forget about that, and it's important to remember it. The second is, as an observation, I think there's a bit of a divide between the newly arrived, the people like me that work in central London, pejorative references to people using Kingston as a dormitory town, etc. And then also the students, and then people who've lived here maybe for several decades. And my view is that it doesn't really need to be this way, and actually there's much greater scope for better integration between those three groups. I myself volunteer on 2 different things in Kingston. It's a place I care about, and I have very good relationships with all of my neighbours that come from all those 3 different groups. But often it feels like never the twain shall meet, and I just wondered what scope is there for sort of improving those kind of community dynamics. And one thing I have in particular in mind is about volunteering. As council services inevitably diminish over the next few years, the greater weight is going to need to be put on the shoulders of people who are prepared to volunteer. And is there scope there for bringing the newly arrived into that kind of thing? Sorry if that's a bit winding and vague.
Absolutely not. Couldn't agree with you more. Volunteering comes under my portfolio. My portfolio is very large. It covers growth and identity. That's the name of it. But it covers heritage, art, culture, schools, businesses, lots and lots of different things. But actually, we had a meeting earlier on this week talking about the importance of volunteering and what that gives both to the person who is volunteering and to people that they are helping. And actually, what you're discussing is correct, and for any person who doesn't touch the council in greater depth, which actually the majority of residents don't, like you say, they go to work, they come home, they only probably notice the biggest angst would be if their rubbish wasn't collected, for example, or if their street really wasn't cleaned. Other than that, they don't know about all the other services that we deliver. And part of what we're trying to do as an administration, there's so much work we've had to do. For example, there wasn't a database of all the businesses in Kingston. That's insane. Businesses are really important because actually we need to engage with businesses because many business owners actually are also residents and they want to do things themselves, but also they want to be part of their community. Obviously you've got church groups, all sorts of different things, but one of our key things is actually better engagement through things like the all-in-one survey that we conducted at the back end of last year. We are obviously trying to get more and more people on board with email addresses so that we can actually reach out. But there is something in Kingston called Go Volunteer, and I don't think it's sung enough about. And I think we've got a piece of work that we're going to be doing in the council around that. I almost see, for example, in the future, this is the ancient royal borough. We have some fantastic heritage in the town centre. I'd love to see, for example, a bit like the game makers for the Olympics, us having volunteers that proudly show our visitors around the borough. And there's all sorts of different things we can do, and we've got some really fantastic ideas, and I'm happy to meet you separately if you'd like to help me in terms of how we galvanise more people. But I totally agree with you, and it will be happening.
Folks, I have 2 more questions lined up, and we're then going to have a vote as to whether we continue on with this part or not. So there's a gentleman down to my left in the green, please, and then there's a lady over here.
Hi there. Simon Jakeman. I have lived here for 40 years, so hi. Hi there. Hi. Just a quick question. Has the Tolworth Tesco site got a new name? There's a few rumours going around today that it's been sold. Sorry. The Tolworth Tesco site, has it got a new name, new owner? It's been in the local papers and stuff today. But I don't know if that was your big announcement, so I didn't want to, from last week. Sorry. It's been in the Surrey Comic today.
What is that? That feels like Simon, that really feels like a loaded question. Well, okay, I'm hesitating. I'm not going to say any more. Sorry?
Simon Cowell's brother.
I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's obviously something...
I can guarantee... Well, I'm wrong. I guarantee Simon Cowell has nothing to do with this, or his brother, or anything, but it... Well, I don't know about that, but... Yeah, okay. Look, my understanding is it has, but there isn't anything I can tell you about that until they're prepared to publicly announce that, which is some weeks off.
Right. Oh, there you got a choice.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Marge Grant and I am a resident in Kingston for many years, and I'm also a manager for a voluntary sector organisation in Kingston, and I wanted to go back to the question the gentleman over there raised a while back about social care, because they are very large budgets, and everybody said how lovely it is to live in Kingston. I really do enjoy living here, but day in, day out, we see a lot of families, a lot of people who have got lots of problems that are supported very, very well by the voluntary sector in the borough. And we do have a very good, thriving voluntary sector. Lots of groups who are doing lots of work, who have also got lots of volunteers who are doing lots of work within those groups. And I suppose, just going back to the council, just to say, those budgets are very high. We know that, but also you have got a big source of resource in the borough that you could call on to do a lot more of that work. And we do deliver that work for quite a lot less than lots of big commercial firms do. So it's just really to say to everybody, the voluntary sector in Kingston is very, very boisterous. It does a really brilliant job, and if you don't know about what's around there, go out and find out and volunteer and help out with those organisations, because there is quite a lot, and I hope that you guys will remember that and support and not allow the voluntary sector to disappear.
Anybody like to respond to that from the panel?
Yeah, I will just quickly respond to that, because one of the biggest pressures, as I said earlier, is about social care, particularly adult social care, as all getting older. A piece of work is currently being undertaken to join up ourselves much more cohesively with the health service, because obviously with elderly care, the great risk is being put into hospital. And there are two risks there. The first risk, and I'm not being flippant, is that hospitals are quite dangerous places and you'd rather not be in there. They tend to be full of sharp instruments and pills and drugs, so they're not great places to go to in the first place, even the best of them. The second issue is, of course, that the cost is astronomical once you actually put a patient into hospital. And the faster, if they have to go, and you can get them out and back into their home and caring for them in an environment which is actually more suitable for them, the actually less expensive it is, and the better it is for that older person. Now, for that to happen, for us to join up those services and with the health service and the hospital and make that work properly, we are going to be absolutely dependent on carers and the voluntary sector to make that work, because it's not something we can do alone. And I will say this to you, actually, this is a complete different gear change and change of subject, but I do want to share one thing with you, which comes back to that issue of budgets, is that the voluntary sector is very good at what it does, but actually as a council, we have to have a new relationship with everybody about everything, because it isn't just one thing or another. To give you an example, which I did quote last week, there's a road in my ward that had to have its pavements resurfaced. Now, council policy on resurfacing pavements, don't boo, but is to put tarmac in place and to get rid of the paving stones. Good reasons for it. It's cheaper, less maintenance, and also it means that it doesn't get broken up by trees, which is often a problem with the existing pavings that are there. Now, unsurprisingly, residents in this particular road were very upset with the idea that that was going to happen, so I met them, about 40 of them as it turned out, down the road. And actually what we did was strike a deal. I said, look, okay, I understand where you're coming from here, and I get what your problem is, but will you help us here? Because actually, you've got a grass verge that hasn't been a grass verge for about 30 years, because for some reason they filled it in with tarmac. So I'll do what I can to give you a grass verge back. So actually your road looks hugely improved. Suddenly you've got a grass verge, a bit of green, not all that tarmac. You accept the tarmac on the pavement, but then I've got one other thing to ask of you, and that's that you cut the verge, because I can't afford to do the cutting of the verge because we just don't have that money. Now, you'd be surprised, actually, when you ask that, residents engage with you and are more than happy to do it and are more than happy to help out. And so that's the type of debate and discussion we have to have a conversation about. It's not just about volunteering to be a carer, which is equally important, but it's what you can do to help us deliver services generically across the entire borough.
Before we decide what we're going to do next, I think Andrea would like to say just a few brief words.
Yeah, I think just to go back to the point that Maud raised, she works in a fantastic charity called Wellcare, which is in my ward, which supports children and families that have all sorts of different challenges and are very vulnerable. And I think that one of the challenges that councils face in the future that we've discussed, which is around obviously managing our cost, is actually how do we look after families more effectively that are vulnerable. And it could be that the adult is vulnerable, or it could be that the child is vulnerable. And again, to go back to the point, actually we in Kingston really are an incredible community of people, and we're very caring. And so there's a lot more that can be done, but I just wanted to really thank you for all your work, and to everyone in the voluntary sector who does work so hard, because we are pretty unique in Kingston in what we are able to deliver. But yes, we do always want more volunteers, and so, that would be great as well.
Folks, we've got to that point that I spoke about earlier. Now, there is the third point where you get a chance to speak to Kevin, Andrea, Terry, the ward councillors, and I know to a lot of people that's actually very, very important. And I know from doing these events over the years that some people prefer that. That's why not everybody asks a question. So, we can do another 15 minutes on this, but in democratic fashion, could I ask for a show of hands if you would like to extend the Q&A for another 15 minutes? I think that looks fairly majority. Yes, so we will extend for another 15 minutes. We'll go on till 25 to 9, at which point I will draw it to a close. If there's anybody trying to get in for a second time, I'll be quite ruthless. As long as there's somebody trying to speak who hasn't spoken before, I'll give them the first opportunity. So I think the first hand I see is a lady with a yellow top here, please. Followed by somebody here.
Hello. So I'm Elise Creighton. I should probably start by introducing myself as someone who's registered blind. And I volunteer in the area, and we've formed an informal parliament for visually impaired residents. We invite them to publicly speak to us and raise concerns, their biggest concern being the introduction of shared space within Kingston. When you develop new areas, it's actually something that's quite alienating for them, something that they find really difficult to negotiate. I suppose my question is, why do you choose to develop an area with shared space, and will you keep developing Kingston with it?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to address that. I mean, as it happens, it's not bizarre, but I actually do know quite a lot about this. I was formerly the chief executive of something called the Centre for Accessible Environments, which handled all these issues around disability, particularly with buildings and shared space. There's quite a for those of you who are not aware, there's quite a raging debate about whether we should be using shared space or not. Fundamentally what it's about, although there are lots of nuances to it, but fundamentally what it's about is if you remove curbs or not. And if you remove curbs, how do you, as a vision impaired person, work out where the road is and where the pavement is? I think that's fundamentally, in simplistic terms, what the issue is. My view on that is that as we develop these types of schemes, if that's what we choose to do, we've got to find an sure way of ensuring that we can safeguard those who are visually impaired from the road. And it's something which I think we should be working on, and it's something we should be looking at. There have been quite a lot of experiments on this. For those of you who know of it, there's a very famous scheme that's been introduced in Exhibition Road in Kensington near the museums, which is a shared space scheme, which has done a very good job actually of slowing down traffic through the area, which is one issue, and pedestrianising more. And there is an experimental attempt to look at what you can do to delineate what is pavement and what is road to help people with vision impairments. So I'm sure we will, and I pledge to you, we will look at that. What I will say, though, is that certainly as this town develops, I'm very concerned about a number of issues around the transport and infrastructure within the town centre, the road network, the way it works, the way it operates. We know from some work that's already been done about the number of wasted car journeys that go on in Kingston, with people having to go all the way around the one-way system to get to the same place they started. And we need to look at how we can address that. The other issue, which is, I don't know if it's anything that's affected any of you, but I have a very, very grave concern about air quality in Kingston. I think in my time, unless it's my lungs are getting knackered as I get older, I do sense that air quality is declining. And I may be wrong, but it's just a feeling I have. And I think we've got to look at how we address that through planning policy, but equally through creating more pedestrianised areas of the town, if at all possible. So these are all things that we're considering in part of that bigger debate about growth and infrastructure and how we make the town work better.
My concern is I live in Villiers Close, and the dustmen on a Wednesday don't pick up the rubbish they drop on the floor, and I go round with a bag and pick it all up. The other concern is, I know you rejected the milk depots building they wanted, which I quite agreed with, and there's rubbish there that should be picked up. It's terrible. Why didn't the buyers put all the fence round and lock it all off? Because there's people there parking, and I've got to give my visitors a ticket to park.
Sure. I mean, our powers around the milk depot issue are fairly limited. So, I mean, I will take that away and have a look at it. The wider issue about the dust carts, interestingly, last week, somebody made a very valid point that why is it that her street gets cleaned on a Monday, yet the bin men turn up on a Tuesday and just make it a mess until next Monday when the street man turns up to sweep the street. I mean, that's a very valid point, and I think it's something that we might want to look at. At that meeting, a colleague who's sitting over here, Councillor Cunningham, made the point that the new scheme that we are looking to introduce will change quite drastically the way waste is collected. So currently what happens is that your green boxes and other bits of waste are taken from your garden to the dust cart, wherever that might be. It could be 50 or 60 metres down the road, it could be much closer. The new scheme of recycling that's being brought out actually has what they call a slave bin, which is a bin that goes up the pavement with an operative who just pours it in from the front garden straight into that bin. Now, we're hopeful that that will cut down on some of that wastage because you're not having to transport it backwards and forwards. We also hope, please let this happen, that we won't get so many bins that end up in the wrong person's garden or in the wrong place, which is the most frustrating thing, because it happens to me and it's very frustrating.
I'm Carol Wilney, a resident for 50 years and unapologetic about it. Kingston is a nice place to live. I would like to pick up on the litter issue. I have in my pocket a camera. On the way here, I've photographed overflowing bins and composting litter. Some of it has been there for weeks, and I wonder how much influence you have over the management of Quadrant and Veolia. Because surely the managers should be doing tours of the street, particularly in town centre, and checking that the work is being done.
I can, yeah.
You can see the photographs if you wish.
Well, my new portfolio takes into account a lot of the issues. I've already had meetings with Quadrant this week, looking at some of the ways that things are done. We're looking at the quality of the staff. We're looking at how things are cleaned up properly. So it's an issue that I've taken up, obviously, as a newly appointed person on this residents panel. As a councillor myself, I constantly get emails where a mess has been left. We contact the Veolia or whoever to come back to sort out the problems. So initially, it's something I think you should be going through your councillors to get cleaned up straight away. We get straight in contact with the contractor to get them back to do it, and the more we do that, the less they're going to leave the mess behind. So you need to inform us so that we can get them to come back and do it each time we record it, and we can get back to them. Yep. That is something that I will obviously take to Veolia as well. So give me time and I'll do it.
The other thing I just wanted to add is I agree with you. And in fact, when we took over our new portfolios recently, my colleague that covers my portfolio and I actually went on a walkabout in the town centre so that I could show him, because he's from New Malden, actually how disgraceful some of the areas have become. Really grotty, shrubbery, they're so overgrown, it's embarrassing. And some areas of the town centre look really beautiful and have got lovely hanging baskets, and then other areas are just awful. And you will see a big difference. But we're basically creating a programme of works, and you will start seeing that. But I think I know exactly the area you're talking about, and it looks horrible, and it's right in the middle of the town centre, and we're all going to fix it.
I'll just come in briefly again, because I actually did a walkabout today to have a look, and I saw one area by the side of the police station, by the side of the Guildhall, looking at that. I then had a walk down through the whole alongside the Thames to see how that's being cleared up, because traditionally over the last few years it's been horrendous down there. And looking at the bins, because there has been a problem of the bins overflowing. This is something that has been addressed, and it is much better than it was, but obviously we're not happy with it, so we'll be working on it harder.
Hello there, my name's John Carafi. I've lived in the borough for about 40 years. And you spoke earlier about housing development. This gentleman here spoke about tower blocks, and I just wondered how many units you expected to be built in the borough in the next 10 years, and how many people those units would accommodate.
Well, the issue there is, if you accept the figures around growth, and we can debate that, then the growth in population in the borough would be, on London's terms, about 34%. If you were to extrapolate 34% across the entire borough, you're talking 20 to 25,000 homes. Now, we can't accommodate that, really, very easily. The town centre here, to be honest with you, can't contribute anything, really, towards that in a major way. There aren't enough sites that could even potentially be developed for housing that would generate anything more than a few hundred to contribute to that. So it is something that the entire borough is going to have to work towards and actually work with. I think one of the things that's interesting about this as well is that what will, in a sense, define some of where homes are built is, of course, the Crossrail 2 programme, which is coming. Crossrail 2 will increase the flow of trains through Kingston Station, I think it's to 10 an hour, directly into Tottenham Court Road, as opposed to Waterloo via Victoria. So it's a very different concept for Kingston. But that, at the moment, although there's a lot of debate going on at the moment with government and the Treasury, that at the moment is due to stop at 5 different stations within Kingston. It's within the borough. It's Kingston, New Malden, Surbiton, Tolworth and Chesington South. And it's inevitable, wherever infrastructure touches, you're likely to get some form of development go with it. But with this stage, it's really difficult to say exactly what that looks like.
My name is John Crawford. I've been a resident for 40 years as well, and but I want to talk about Tolworth. There have been 2 planning applications. One has been withdrawn today because of the Tesco site, but that involved 703 dwellings in blocks, tower blocks, but the other scheme is still under consideration, which is the Tolworth Tower development and refurbishment, and there's 2 further tower blocks proposed alongside Tolworth Tower, which is going to be a huge change in that part of the borough. It's going to introduce a lot more people. And obviously there's no school provision in any of these planning applications. They're only housing only, and you've also got the roundabout, which has been one of the problems why the Tesco scheme went on for at least 10 years without being resolved. So would you like to just comment about provisions of schools and improvements on roads with these major housing and office schemes in the Tolworth area?
Well, okay. First of all, I'm not aware that the Tesco application. I mean, that you're telling me something. I don't know that it's been withdrawn. I've not heard that. So that is interesting if that is the case.
Yes, I got an email from Councillor Reid saying that it had been delayed. They were having a meeting next week that was detected. People were going to give a presentation
Sure.
on Monday.
Sure. I think it's possibly tied up with a question which I didn't answer earlier. So no, I just say that I'm not sure what the ground is, but I didn't say it had been withdrawn if that was the case. Yes, you're right about infrastructure. I mean, I think I tried to make that point in my opening remarks that actually homes is one thing, and undeniably we need more homes. I mean, it is a significant problem we have in London. It's not just us; it is across London. There are two aspects to this that are really important. As I said earlier, where Crossrail touches, I think it's inevitable you're going to get more development. I think one of the bigger debates which has not taken place yet is what happens outside of London. We don't want to touch the Greenbelt, nobody wants to go anywhere near that, but it's certainly the case that there are surrounding district councils in Surrey, for example, who have very, very significant house building programmes they want to undertake. And you've also got to reflect and remember that actually a lot of the people who work in London don't live here. They actually live in Surrey and Kent and those surrounding areas. Now, we don't want to build the Greenbelt, but we've certainly got to make sure and do what we can, and that's what we're trying to do, to help those districts to take some of the burden that's there. And we're trying to make infrastructure we're not trying to build the Greenbelt, we're trying to reach across it so that the infrastructure can bring those people more significantly into London. And that's a project which we're trying to work out as well. When it comes to schools and hospitals, this is really where I'm coming from, because whatever development takes place will never pay through that development for all these infrastructure things that we all want to see. That's just the case, that there is not enough money. So even when a developer comes along and makes a contribution to education, it never covers the impact of the development. And there's nothing we can do about that. That's national planning policy that sets that and works with the industry on that. So we're sort of caught, which is why I'm saying we've really got to work hard with government and with the mayor for London to try and bring infrastructure in with any of these projects that happen. Now, I think actually, I'm not arguing whether the scheme that's currently being proposed around Toll Town is good or not, because it's not here nor there in a sense. What is interesting is that I think Tolworth could be transformed by more people living there. I think people that living in an area regenerate an area. And I think we'd see a completely different Tolworth if you did put more people living there, shopping there, working there, and doing those things which we're keen on. You may have missed it, many of you, but we've actually recently done a deal with Lidl it's not a store, to base their UK headquarters in Tolworth. So we've sold a piece of land to them for them to build a headquarters. Now, there are 750 people who are going to work in Tolworth who currently don't, and they're going to shop there and have lunch there and do all the things that really we want to see. And that will change the nature of a place like Tolworth. So there's a lot of things that can happen through growth in houses, but actually there's other things we can do which we can help accommodate some of the infrastructure things we all want to see.
I have two more questions, and then we are going to draw this part of the evening to a close.
Hello. I'm Tony Williams. I've lived in Kingston since 1971, which unfortunately is not all of my life. Yeah, almost. I want to build on Phil's point, who was over there somewhere. I don't know if he's still here. When you opened this session, you said that there were kind of three priorities, really. And one of those was about engagement, and we haven't actually dealt with the issue of engagement in itself too much tonight. And I wanted to kind of pose something about, I really like the fact that you're having this conversation, and I know that you're having other conversations in other places, but it does occur to me that, we are a bit of a similar demographic, is one thing, and what can we do to widen that demographic? But also that the pointer's just disappearing from me. Oh yes, the nature of what we're doing here is a little bit of we're asking you questions and you're responding to them, you know. And if what we're doing here is we're having a conversation, that was my big point actually. I kind of got lost it over really. If we're having a conversation, then actually it would be much better, wouldn't it? Actually, if the dynamic was different, and actually it was much more of a kind of circular thing, and we were talking to each other, and it was a flatter conversation too. You know, you weren't our dad, and we're not your children. You know, I'm sure that's what you want too. So how do we get to that place? That's what I wanted to say.
With these things, we have to start somewhere. We committed to do a borough-wide survey back last year. Believe it or not, that was the first time a borough-wide survey had ever been undertaken in the borough last year. And off the back of that, we did a number of Meet the Leaders sessions where I went out and was in the Market House here and various others. In fact, there were 16 of them across the borough over the course of about 6 weeks. Which kept me very busy. So we did that. We're now doing this, and I'm hopeful that we can keep doing this, but we do have to change it. You're absolutely right. You know, question time is great, and maybe we should do some of those, but we do need to start having a conversation about things. There's a few other things which I think are important here. One is, I think our method of, I think I said this in the opening remarks, our method of consulting people is pretty poor. As I said, it's still 20th century consultation in the 21st century where we send out a letter to people about things and ask them to respond. And it's hardly surprising. I mean, don't rush to your pens, but I mean, you might find it surprising that from all that's been said about the Tesco Tolworth site, through all the battles that have taken place over the years, the thousands of people who got engaged to try and stop Tesco, we've actually only had 45 people write in objecting to it. You know, so I'm not suggesting that means it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that our method of engagement at the moment is mainly driven through that type of consultation procedure, and we've got to change that. So we're working on that at the moment. We'll have something more on that later in the year. There are two other things. Is that it's great. I'm here. I'm more than happy to come here with my colleagues. I'm not your ward councillor. I'm not your neighbourhood either, because I'm in the Mordens and Combe neighbourhood. Now, the borough is divided into 4, so there are neighbourhood committees in each of those 4 areas as well, which are very local to you. I'm sure many of you know about those and attend them from time to time. But what we've recently done is say to them, look, let's stop having meetings in slightly dim halls where sometimes nobody even turns up, or the people there are really only interested in a particular issue, an extension with their next door neighbour or something like that. Let's stop doing that. Stop it. And actually start properly working with you and being representatives engaging with you. So we've said to them, look, you need to start taking some of your meetings and turning them into neighbourhood forums where you take a big issue. It could be antisocial behaviour, it could be parks, it could be health, it could be the river. I don't really care. It's up for you as local people to decide, and have a meeting about that. Put leaflets out, like we did here for this, about that issue, pull people into it, sit down and have that conversation, debate about what you want, and then those people in that neighbourhood can then go away and help do that. And even more than that, we've then said that with the 3 councillors in your ward, there are 3 in Grove, there are 3 in Tudor, elsewhere across the borough, the 3 of them should have the opportunity to go to a specific area in their ward. Get council officers with them, leaflet your street and say at 6 o'clock on Tuesday or whenever the time is, your councillors and your officers are going to be in your area. Just come out, just ask a question, just talk to them, engage with them in the street, point out what things that really upset you in your street. Now, that's time consuming, it's hard work, but I think we've got to do it because that's the type of relationship we've got to start to have with each other. Otherwise, you're going to keep shouting at me because I'm not doing the things you want, but at least if I've done it, knowing what your view was, I hope, even though you might not agree with me, you'll be a bit more content that you at least had your say.
Am I allowed to say that's my favourite question of the evening? Last question, and then talking of conversation, that's what we're going to really do next.
Okay, I'm going to make it really good then. So my question, I'm Sarah. I'm a resident in Norbiton Ward, and I'm also a local business owner. I run a company called Stories Talks Heritage, and our path has crossed before at the Small Grants Committee. You mentioned the heritage of Kingston, and the heritage of Kingston, I'm sure a lot of people here will know, is fantastic and has national significance, not just local significance. When I first moved here, I really wanted to live in Surbiton because the train link was a lot better, but I couldn't afford it, so we moved here instead. But I didn't bond with the town until I started to learn the stories of the town through doing a play that I was in. So I just wanted to raise the point that actually something that connects everybody here in this room are the stories of the borough. And it's something that often gets overlooked because, you know, we have more important things to spend money on, like adult social care and people who are not having a great time. But things like that can really work to bring communities together, to make people feel better. But we can also work with people who are coming into the town, like developers. Kingston's history survives now in its stories rather than in its infrastructure. There are some old bits, but not that many. And we don't seem to be celebrating them. And if we're inviting developers into the town to build stuff, can we ask them to tell our stories as well?
You're absolutely right, and it's really lovely to meet you. Our paths have crossed, obviously, particularly via email, and I love your story. You'll be delighted to see. So today I'm working on this, and this is basically going to be the Kingston's Heritage Trail, and it will absolutely start talking and telling the story of what we're doing. And I don't know how many people know in this room, but we have an amazing bridge called the Clatton Bridge, which is the oldest bridge in the whole of London. And it's really sad because hardly anyone knows, and they all walk over it with no idea actually of the historical importance of the bridge. And you're absolutely right, and I would happily work with you, as you know, to further the story, because this lovely lady goes around schools with a very, very interesting story all about the ancient royal borough and the kings of past. And our borough really has a very rich history, and it hasn't been celebrated properly.
Can I just add to that one thing, and that is that if we must grow, then our heritage and the culture and the things that actually attract people to this borough are the things we must actually preserve and enhance and do more with, because we mustn't lose touch with that at all. I am probably in all the budget nonsense that's going on, I believe that things like heritage and the arts and culture are actually part of the growth agenda. They're not some fluffy thing we do over here. And I actually am probably about the only council leader in London, when I meet my other leaders, who's even talking of building new museums, not shutting their existing ones. And because I think I'm absolutely committed to it, it's got to be the most important part of what we do if we're going to preserve everything we want.
Kevin, at that, could I thank the panel, Kevin, Terry and Andrea very much. More importantly, could I thank all of you for coming out tonight. There is a third part in talking about the penultimate question, conversation. We have the ward councillors here in the front. We have the panellists. There's also myself and a couple of colleagues. If there's anything we can help you with, we would be more than happy. So I will at that. And my final plea, talking about the gentleman's question about we need to do this better, I'm the first to admit that, but we need your help to do it. So please start. This is the start, as Kevin said. Fill out the forms and give us your ideas. If you think tonight was awful, tell us that as well. We really need to know it. But thank you all very much indeed.